Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Sunnah TV. Before he was born, his father was already in the grave. A child came into the world in the city of Makkah, in a year so important the Arabs would later name it after an event they could not explain, the Year of the Elephant. No king announced his arrival, no empire recorded his name. He was an orphan in a society that crushed the weak and worshipped over 360 idols stacked around a sacred house. And yet, this fatherless, then motherless, then grandfatherless boy would rise to change the entire direction of human history. But the journey from that quiet birth to the day he stood before the largest army of his life was paved with loss, betrayal, blood, and a kind of patience the world had never seen. To understand how it ended, we have to go back to the very beginning. Picture Arabia 1400 years ago, a vast ocean of sand and stone, broken only by scattered tribes who lived by their own brutal laws. There was no central government, no police, no courts. The strong took what they wanted and the weak survived only if a powerful tribe agreed to protect them. Daughters were sometimes buried alive in the sand the moment they were born because a girl was seen as a burden and a shame. Wine flowed freely. Tribes fought wars that lasted 40 years over a single camel. This was the world. This was the darkness. And in the middle of this darkness stood one city that the Arabs loved above all others, Makkah. At its heart was the Kaaba, a simple cube of stone built long ago by the Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ismail. A peace be upon them. It was meant to be a house of pure worship of one God, but over the centuries the people had filled it with idols. Hundreds of them. They would circle the Kaaba and call on stones to feed them, to heal them, to forgive them. The very house built to declare that there is only one God had become the center of the largest idol market in Arabia. Into this city, a boy was born around the year 570 of the Common Era. His mother was a young woman named Amina. His father, Abdullah, had died before the child even opened his eyes, leaving behind only a few camels, some sheep, and a single servant girl. So this child began his life already carrying a weight most people never carry. He was an orphan from his first breath. His grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, a respected leader of the Quraysh tribe, took the newborn in his arms and carried him to the Kaaba. There, he gave him a name that was unusual among the Arabs at that time. He named him Muhammad, the praised one. People asked him why he chose such a strange name. He said he hoped that one day this child would be praised by the people of the earth and the heavens above. He had no idea how true those words would become. Following the custom of the noble families of Makkah, the baby was sent into the desert to be raised among the Bedouin tribes, away from the diseases and softness of the city. A woman named Halima took him into her care, and from the moment this child entered her home, she noticed something. Her dried-up animals gave milk. Her exhausted camel found strength. A blessing had walked into her tent, and she could not explain it. But blessing and loss seemed to travel together in this child's life. At around 6 years old, he was returned to his mother, Amina. And then, on a journey, she fell sick. In a place called Abwa. Between Makkah and Madinah, she died. The boy stood beside the grave of his mother, the only parent he had ever known, and watched as she was buried in the earth. 6 years old. No father, now no mother. His grandfather took him in, and for 2 short years the old man loved that boy with everything he had. He would seat the child beside him in places where even his own sons were not allowed to sit. But then the grandfather died too, and the orphan boy, now 8 years old, had lost his third guardian. Think about what kind of heart this builds. Loss after loss after loss. Most people break under far less, but Allah was preparing him. Every loss was carving something into him, a deep understanding of pain, of loneliness, of what it feels like to have no one in the world. So that one day, when he would call the orphan the widow, the slave, and the broken to Islam, they would know that this was a man who understood their tears from the inside. Care of the boy passed to his uncle, Abu Talib, a poor man but a loyal one. He loved his nephew fiercely and took him on trade journeys to faraway Syria. And it was on one of these journeys that something strange happened. A Christian monk named Bahira, who lived alone in his cell along the trade route, looked at this young boy and his eyes widened. He saw signs, descriptions he had read in old scriptures. He pulled Abu Talib aside and warned him, "Guard this boy carefully, because there is something about him the world has not yet understood." The boy grew into a young man, unlike anyone around him. While Makkah drowned in lies, cheating and drunkenness, he never lied, not once. The people who would later try to kill him gave him a title before they ever hated him. They called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy one. They would leave their most valuable belongings with him, knowing he would never betray them. And then came a marriage that would anchor him for 25 years. A noble, wealthy, and intelligent businesswoman named Khadijah heard of his honesty and hired him to manage her trade. What she learned about his character moved her so deeply that she proposed marriage to him. He was 25. She was older, wiser, and would become the greatest support of his entire life. In her, the orphan finally found a home. But the world was about to change, and it would change in the silence of a cave on a mountain, on a night so heavy that the man who experienced it came running down trembling, certain that something far greater than himself had just entered his life. He had a habit, this man approaching 40. He would leave the noise of Makkah behind and climb a rocky mountain called An-Nur, the Mountain of Light. Near its peak was a small cave called Hijrah, barely big enough for one man to sit in. There he would go for days at a time, taking simple food and water, and he would think. He would look at the idols his people worshipped and feel that something was deeply, terribly wrong. He would look at the stars and the sky and feel a pull toward the one who made them. He did not yet have the words for it, but his heart was searching. It was during the month of Ramadan, in the year 610, that everything broke open. He was alone in the cave when a presence filled the small space. The angel Jibril came to him in a form so overwhelming that the man could barely breathe. And the angel said one word that would echo across the rest of human history. He said, "Read." The man answered honestly, "I cannot read." He was unlettered. He had never been taught. The angel seized him and pressed him until he could not bear it, then released him and said again, "Read." Again he answered, "I cannot read." A second time the angel pressed him to the edge of his strength, and then a third time. And finally came the words that would begin the final revelation to mankind. "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not." The man fled the cave. His heart was pounding out of his chest. He ran down the mountain shaking, and he burst into his home and cried out to Khadijah, cover me, wrap me up." He was terrified. He told her he feared for himself, that he did not understand what had happened to him. And here is where this woman proved why Allah chose her. She did not doubt him for a single second. She wrapped him in a cloak, held him, and spoke words that should be written on every heart. She said, "No, by Allah, Allah will never disgrace you. You keep good relations with your relatives. You help the poor and the destitute. You serve your guests generously, and you assist those struck by calamity. A man of your character is never abandoned by his Lord. That is faith. That is loyalty." In his most frightening moment, she became his anchor. She took him to her elderly cousin, a blind man named Waraka, who had studied the old scriptures and become a Christian. When Waraka heard the story, his blind eyes seemed to light up. He said, "This is the same angel that Allah sent to Musa." And then he said something that must have struck the new prophet like cold water. He said, "I wish I were young and strong enough to be alive when your people drive you out." The prophet was stunned. "Will they really drive me out?" Waraka nodded. He said, "No man has ever come with what you have come with, except that he was met with hostility. If I live to see that day, I will support you with all my strength." But Waraka died soon after, and the warning hung in the air like smoke. For 3 years, the message stayed quiet, spreading only to those closest to him. His wife Khadijah believed first, then his young cousin Ali, just a boy, then his freed servant Zaid, then his dearest friend, a merchant named Abu Bakr, who believed instantly, without hesitation, the moment he heard. A small circle of believers, meeting in secret, praying in hidden corners of Makkah. Then came the command to go public, and this is where the real storm began. He climbed a hill called Safa and called out to all the clans of Quraysh. When they gathered, he asked them, "If I told you an army was hiding behind this hill, ready to attack you, would you believe me?" And every one of them said yes, because in their whole lives, this man had never once told a lie. Then he delivered the message that one God, Allah alone, was calling them to leave their idols. The crowd erupted in fury. His own uncle, a wealthy and arrogant man named Abu Lahab, screamed at him, "May you perish! Is this why you gathered us?" And he turned and walked away in rage. From that moment, Makkah turned against him. The same people who called him Al-Amin now called him a madman, a magician, a liar. But it was the weak who suffered most. The slaves and the poor who accepted Islam had no tribe to protect them, and the Quraysh tortured them without mercy. There was a man named Bilal, an Abyssinian slave. His master dragged him into the burning desert sand under the midday sun, placed a massive rock on his chest, and told him he would not move it until Bilal cursed Muhammad and worshipped the idols. And Bilal, crushed beneath that stone, his skin burning, lifted one finger toward the sky and said only one word over and over, "Ahad, Ahad, one God, one." There was a family, Yasir, his wife Sumaya, and their son Ammar. They were tortured in the open, and Sumaya, an old woman who refused to give up her faith, was killed for it, becoming the first person to die for Islam, the first martyr of this entire story. The Prophet would walk past these tortured believers, unable to save them, his heart breaking, and all he could say was, "Be patient, family of Yasir, for your appointment is paradise." But patience has a cost, and the Quraysh were about to do something that would push the believers to the very edge of survival, a punishment designed not to torture one body, but to starve an entire community to death. The Quraysh held a meeting. They had tried mockery, they had tried torture, they had tried bribing him with wealth, women, and kingship, offering to make him the richest and most powerful man in Arabia if he would just stop. And he had answered them with words that shook them. He said that even if they placed the sun in his right hand and the moon in his left, he would not abandon this message until Allah made it victorious, or he died trying. So they chose a colder weapon, a total boycott. They wrote a document and hung it inside the Kaaba. No one was to buy from the Muslims, no one was to sell to them, no one was to marry them or even speak to them. The Prophet and his entire clan were driven into a narrow valley and trapped there for 3 long years, 3 years of starvation. The believers ate the leaves of trees. They boiled old leather to soften it enough to swallow. Mothers held babies who cried through the night from hunger. People outside the valley could hear the wailing of the children, and still the boycott continued. The Prophet watched his people waste away, their ribs showing through their skin, and he could do nothing but pray. And then Allah sent a small sign. Word came that worms had eaten the boycott document hanging in the Kaaba, that the entire cruel decree had been destroyed, except for the words, "In your name, O Allah." The boycott finally collapsed. The Muslims walked out of that valley alive, barely. But the worst year of the Prophet's entire life was about to arrive. Soon after the boycott ended, Khadijah died. The woman who believed in him first, who held him when he was terrified, who spent her entire fortune supporting the message until she, who had once been one of the wealthiest women in Makkah, died with almost nothing. His anchor was gone. And then, within a short time, Abu Talib died too, his uncle, his shield, the man whose protection had kept the Quraysh from killing the Prophet outright. Now both were gone. The Arabs would remember this as the year of sorrow. With his protector dead, the Quraysh grew bolder and crueler. The Prophet, alone and grieving, made a desperate journey to a nearby city called Taif, hoping its people would accept the message and give him refuge. They did worse than reject him. They set their children and slaves to line the streets and throw stones at him as he left. They pelted him until blood ran down his body and filled his sandals. He stumbled and bled, and they laughed. He finally collapsed in the shade of a wall, broken in body and spirit, and he raised his hands and made one of the most heartbreaking du'as in all of Islamic history. He did not ask for revenge. He said, "O Allah, to you I complain of my weakness, my helplessness, and my lowliness before people. If you are not angry with me, then I do not care what happens to me." And in that lowest moment, the heavens responded. The angel of the mountains came and offered to crush the entire city of Taif between two mountains if the Prophet only said the word. And what did this man, bleeding and rejected, say? No. He said that perhaps from their descendants would come people who worship Allah alone. Even in his agony, his mercy was bigger than his pain. This is the man they called a madman. And then, after the darkest year, came the night that lifted him beyond the reach of any human suffering. In a single night, Allah took him on a miraculous journey from Makkah to Jerusalem, and from there ascending through the seven heavens to a place no creation had ever reached. The journey known as the Isra and Miraj. There, beyond the heavens, the 5 daily prayers were given to his people directly. After a year of losing everything on earth, he was raised closer to his Lord than any human being in history, but he still needed a home on earth. And it was coming from a place he did not expect, a city to the north called Yathrib. A group of its people met him secretly during the pilgrimage season, heard the Quran, and their hearts melted. They pledged to protect him as they would protect their own families. They invited him to come and lead them. The Quraysh got word that the Muslims were escaping to a city that would protect them, and they panicked. They could not let this movement take root somewhere beyond their reach. So they made the final decision. They would assassinate the Prophet. The plan was clever. One young, strong man from every single clan would strike him together so that his blood would be on all the tribes at once, and his family would not be able to take revenge against any single one. On the chosen night, the assassins surrounded his house, swords drawn, waiting for him to come out so they could cut him down all at once. But the man they were waiting for was not in his bed. Allah had warned his prophet. And so on that night, the Prophet asked his young cousin Ali to lie in his bed wrapped in his cloak, to make the killers believe he was still inside. And then, by the help of Allah, the Prophet walked out right through the middle of the assassins. It is said he recited from the Quran, and a kind of blindness fell over them, and he passed between them, sprinkling dust, while they stood there waiting for a man who had already gone. He left with one companion, Abu Bakr, the friend who had believed in him from the very first day. The two of them slipped out of Makkah and hid in a cave on a mountain called Thawr. The Quraysh sent search parties everywhere with a massive reward for whoever brought him back, dead or alive. The trackers followed their trail all the way to the mouth of that cave. They stood right outside it. Abu Bakr could see their feet. He whispered in fear, "O Messenger of Allah, if one of them just looks down at his feet, he will see us." And the Prophet, calm as still water, gave him the answer that Allah himself recorded in the Quran. He said, "Do not grieve, indeed Allah is with us." The trackers looked, and they saw a spider's web across the entrance, and a dove that had built a nest there. They reasoned that no one could have entered without breaking the web, and they turned and left. Two of the most wanted men in Arabia, saved by a spider and a bird, and by the promise of a God who does not abandon those who trust him. They reached Yathrib, and from that day the city would be renamed. It became Madinah, the city of the Prophet. The people poured into the streets, singing, weeping with joy. The orphan who had been driven out of his own home now entered a city that loved him as its leader. This migration, this Hijrah, was so important that it became the starting point of the entire Islamic calendar. A new era had begun, but peace did not come with it. The Quraysh were not finished. They had stolen the homes, the wealth, and the property the Muslims had left behind in Makkah. And now they prepared to crush this new community before it could grow strong. In the second year after the Hijrah, in the month of Ramadan, it came to a head at a place called Badr. The Muslims, around 313 men, many with no armor and few weapons, found themselves facing an army of about 1,000 fully equipped Meccan soldiers with horses, swords, and rage. The night before the battle, the Prophet stood in prayer through the darkness, his hands raised to the sky, weeping and begging Allah for help. He said, "O Allah, if this small band of believers is destroyed today, you will not be worshipped on this earth again." He begged with such intensity that his cloak fell from his shoulders, and Abu Bakr gently picked it up and placed it back, saying, "Enough, O Messenger of Allah. Allah will surely keep his promise." And Allah answered. The Quran tells us he sent down angels to fight alongside the believers. Against every expectation, the small, weak, outnumbered band of Muslims shattered the army of Quraysh. The leaders of Makkah, who had tortured the believers for years, fell in the sand that day. It was a victory so impossible that it could only be explained by the hand of Allah. The Quran called that day the Day of Distinction, the day truth was separated from falsehood. But victory invites revenge. The next year, the Quraysh returned with 3,000 men to a mountain called Uhud, burning to avenge their dead. And here the Muslims learned a painful lesson. The Prophet placed a group of archers on a hill and commanded them never to leave their position, no matter what happened. At first, the Muslims were winning, but when some of the archers saw the enemy fleeing, they left their post to collect the spoils of war, disobeying the command. And in that gap, the enemy cavalry swept around and attacked from behind. The tide turned in moments. Muslims were killed. A rumor spread that the Prophet himself had been slain. And the Prophet was indeed wounded. His tooth was broken, his face was cut, blood poured down as the rings of his helmet were driven into his cheek. His beloved uncle Hamza, the Lion of Islam, was killed, and his body mutilated. The Prophet stood over the bodies of his fallen companions, grieving in a way that broke the hearts of all who saw him. Uhud was a wound that never fully healed. It taught the believers forever that victory comes from Allah, and the moment you trade obedience for the things of this world, that victory can slip through your fingers. The years that followed were filled with siege, betrayal, and survival, as the enemies of Islam gathered every tribe they could into one final attempt to wipe out Medina at the Battle of the Trench. But each time, against all odds, the believers held, and slowly, year by year, the impossible began to take shape. The boy born an orphan in a city of idols was about to return to that very city, not as a fugitive, but as the most powerful man in all of Arabia. In the 8th year after the Hijrah, the Prophet marched toward Makkah with an army of 10,000. The very city that had tortured his followers, starved his people, mocked him, stoned him by proxy, and tried to assassinate him in his sleep. That city now lay open and defenseless before him. This was the moment. Every law of that brutal Arabian world said he had the right to take his revenge. The men who had killed Sumayya, the men who had mutilated his uncle Hamza, the men who had driven him from his home, they were all there, trembling, waiting for the sword. He entered Makkah with his head bowed so low in humility before Allah that it nearly touched the back of his camel. He did not enter as a conqueror drunk on power. He entered as a servant overwhelmed by gratitude. He went straight to the Kaaba, the house of his ancestor Ibrahim. The house built to worship one God was still surrounded by 360 idols. One by one, he struck them down, reciting from the Quran. Truth has come and falsehood has vanished. Indeed, falsehood is bound to vanish. The idols fell. The Kaaba was purified. The very purpose it was built for after centuries of darkness was finally restored. And then he turned to the people of Makkah, the people who had done everything to destroy him. They stood before him terrified, certain that this was the day of their slaughter. He asked them, "What do you think I am going to do with you?" They said, "You are a noble brother, the son of a noble brother." They were begging for mercy with their words. And then he gave the answer that defines who he truly was. He said, "Go, you are free." The same words the Prophet Yusuf once said to the brothers who had thrown him into a well. No revenge, no execution, no humiliation. He forgave the entire city. The men who had hunted him for 21 years walked free. This is the heart of the whole story. He was never fighting for revenge. He was never fighting for power or wealth or a throne. He was fighting so that human beings could be free to worship their Creator alone, free from the slavery of stone idols and the slavery of other men. The moment that goal was achieved, his mercy poured out over the very people who hated him. 2 years later, he returned to Makkah one final time for the pilgrimage. Over 100,000 people stood with him in the valley of Arafat. The orphan who once had no one now stood before a sea of believers stretching to the horizon. And he delivered his farewell sermon, words that would guide humanity for the rest of time. He told them all people are equal, that no Arab is better than a non-Arab, no white person better than a black person, except by their consciousness of God. He told them their blood and their wealth were sacred. He commanded them to be kind to women, to fear Allah in how they treated them. He reminded them that they would all stand before their Lord and be questioned. And then he asked the crowd, "Have I conveyed the message?" And 100,000 voices roared back, "Yes." He raised his finger to the sky and said, "O Allah, bear witness. O Allah, bear witness. O Allah, bear witness." And it was during this final pilgrimage that the verse came down. "This day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you." The mission was finished. The message was complete. A few months later, he fell ill. The fever grew. The man who had carried the weight of an entire revelation, who had been stoned and starved and wounded and exiled, lay in the room of his wife Aisha, his head resting near her. In his final moments, with the choice given to him between staying in this world or meeting his Lord, he chose his Lord. His last words on this earth were a whisper to the highest companions, and he was gone. The news struck Medina like a collapse of the sky. Strong men fell to the ground, unable to stand. The mighty Umar, sword in hand, refused to believe it and threatened anyone who said the Prophet had died. And then Abu Bakr, the friend from the first day, the companion in the cave, stood before the people, his own heart shattered, and spoke the words that held the entire Muslim nation together. He said, "Whoever worshipped Muhammad, know that Muhammad is dead. But whoever worshipped Allah, know that Allah is alive and never dies." Now stop for a moment and look at the full arc of this life. He was born an orphan with nothing. He buried his father before birth, his mother at 6, his grandfather at 8. He lost the wife who loved him, the uncle who protected him. The children he buried one after another. He was mocked, starved, stoned, and hunted. And through all of it, he never lied, never broke, never returned cruelty with cruelty. And from that one man, that one orphan in the desert, came a light that spread across the entire earth and still reaches into your chest right now, 1400 years later. So here is the question to sit with tonight. He endured all of that, every loss, every wound, every betrayal, so that the message of one God could reach down through the centuries and arrive at you. The only thing he ever asked of those who came after him was that they remember him, follow him, and send their blessings upon him. He carried you in his heart before you were ever born. The question is whether you will carry him in yours. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon him today and every day until we meet him at the fountain he promised would never run dry.